Sweet baby Jesus, everybody. It's been a while. Sources, description box below. Today we're going to talk about all things Palestinian and Israeli. Hi, my name is Zach. Statistically, most of you guys don't know who I am. I studied and have been professionally involved in security policy in the US, so I can go into that more if you guys would like. But otherwise, I'm just going to jump straight into it. This is going to be a longer podcast broken up into smaller videos. So today we're going to go over, got my little notes on my phone here. We're going to go over essentially what Netanyahu plans for the Gazans currently, or the Palestinians generally. Does he even have the capacity to be able to enact that plan? Or is there kind of a, I guess we could say, for lack of a better term, a secret kind of motive to drag the US in? So if you have a policy that you know you can't fully fulfill, then you ask the US to help you in very specific ways, despite what the American people think. So that's going to be a video. Another video, we're going to go into what is going to happen to the Palestinians if that plan were to be, say, theoretically successful. And then we're going to go into the nuance of specifically the Great Catastrophe, the Nakba in 1948 that kicked out hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. So what's interesting is a lot of folks don't really know about or go into the Israeli historical archives about what specifically happened on those days, what kind of tactics were used, what were the consequences aside from the kind of the refugee crisis that it had created, and what can we see moving forward in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because that was one of the last times there was a mass quote-unquote exodus that had happened, and it could probably inform what's likely going to happen in the future as well on a tactical level. So this is going to be pretty interesting. I'm going to jump straight into this. Oh, and also, by the way, the significance of all this is the fact that we, as Americans, or if you're internationally, we're going to likely be involved in this, and it is going to potentially lead to a catastrophic bad idea of all sorts of things to happen, but I will save the rest for the video. So, video number one. What specifically does Netanyahu plan to do in Israel? By the way, I'm intentionally trying to offer you guys different sources across the world. So today we're talking about Israel, so I'm going to give you Israeli sources as well. A lot of YouTubers don't do that. They give you American sources talking about Israeli events or events going on in China or Iran or some countries in, like, say, Central African Republic or something like that. So I'm trying to diversify that intentionally to try to diversify people's knowledge about what's actually happening in the countries that we're discussing. Anyway, so this is going to be according to the Times of Israel. So this is kind of more of a right, more of a right Israeli newspaper. So if there's any Israelis that disagree, feel free to say it. I was in Israel for a period of time and several months, and this was kind of the general consensus. Okay. So this is what Netanyahu is saying about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict right now. Quote, Israel will have overall security responsibility over the Gaza Strip for an indefinite period after the war against Hamas ends. He's saying specifically that Israel will have an indefinite security responsibility in Gaza, which requires, obviously, an occupation. Oopsie. How is he going to do that? Well, one of the ideas that he had stated is specifically to create security zones in the south where, quote-unquote, civilians would be able to go and the rest would be considered combatants. But wait a second, he's bombing the security zones of the south. So the idea with the Israelis is they're sectioning off the Palestinian territories. This is going to be kind of common sense to some of you guys because you've been following it. So bear with me, I'm going to talk about this for a second, then kind of move on. But essentially, Israel is sectioning off different Palestinian land. They're going from the north, they're going to work their way to the south, and they're trying to create these quote-unquote safe zones to clear out more areas so there's less people involved, so it essentially makes their life easier. But they're already creating more catastrophes in the south. Oopsie poopsie. Now here's what I really want to talk about. How exactly would you do that? Because you can't just simply occupy all that territory. There's 2.2-ish million Palestinians. So here's a funny story for you guys, and this is where we're going to get in the crux of the issue. In order to occupy land, and maybe I should clip this because I want people to actually hear this part. In order to occupy the land, typically what happens is you have one soldier per 40 civilians. This has been incorporated all the way back in the first 18 months the U.S. occupied Germany back in World War II. There's 400,000 Americans in that area. And then that was tested later on in 1999 in Kosovo. I have my little notes here. 50,000 troops for a population of 2 million. Then we tried to extend that a little bit in Iraq. We tried one soldier per 160 civilians. That was an abysmal failure. We didn't have enough troops in that area. We did that intentionally to try to invade more countries at the same time. Because that was a failure, we resorted to more violent means to be able to take over countries because we couldn't militarily occupy them. And so what we know specifically about Israel is if they're following the gold standard, which is essentially consistent across all militaries right now, they would need approximately 55,000 soldiers in Gaza. Now, an individual might go ahead and look at the Israeli military and note, oh, wait a second here. They have quite a bit. They have 170 active duty personnel. That's enough people, right? No, because not everybody, you're not going to take, Father John. I guess that would be probably a minister, so you wouldn't take him anyway. You wouldn't take Jeffrey the cook over here. You're not going to throw him in there, right? You're not going to throw all the logistics personnel in there as well. What you're specifically discussing is who exactly are the occupiers that are going to be going in that country. Who are the direct action individuals? Direct support. So that would be the infantry and infantry-esque individuals as well. They account for approximately 10 to 20% of the military. So in Israel, that would be roughly 35,000-ish individuals. And they need 55,000. And that's just in Gaza. That's not including the West Bank. If you add the West Bank on top of that, it's about 75,000 extra folks, not including if they have to occupy southern Lebanon or parts of Syria. What happens then? They don't have the personnel. Yes, you have reservists, but you can't rely on the reservists forever. They're not going to be reservists at that point. So here's where we get to really interesting stuff. They have a couple different options here, and this is relevant because by understanding this, we know how the U.S. is going to be tied into this. Do you see the issue that's happening already? So here it is. Number one, they could deploy their reserves indefinitely by increasing the amount of time that they have to stay in the military, but that is going to be impressively unpopular for the population. They're not going to want to do that. Rightfully so. You're not going to want to send your, say, 18-year-old daughter or son out into the battlefield and say, oh yeah, sorry, I know it was X amount of time and now we're going to double the amount of time in order to increase the amount of troop levels. That's not going to be popular for an individual like Netanyahu, who's already notoriously unpopular, right? So that's likely not going to happen. Oopsie poopsie, what's going to happen next? Number two, displace and unalive more Palestinians. They're already working on that, but in order to essentially help out their situation in terms of population, they're going to have to put in, triple overtime in order to make that happen. And that's just not going to happen within the next handful of months, right? They're unaliving. I'm saying unaliving because the algorithms and so on. They're unaliving a lot of individuals, of course. But in order to actually increase this ratio of troops to civilians, that's just not going to happen. They don't have enough individuals to ensure, or firepower to ensure that this happens. And a mass Palestinian exodus is likely not going to happen within the next, say, a couple weeks. So what is the last situation? Well, let's think here. There's already a military that has a secret military base there. They already account for approximately 16 to 20%, depending on the year, of Israel's entire military budget. And they've already tried to start a war with Iran. You see where I'm going with this? Israel is creating a policy to occupy Gaza indefinitely, knowing they don't have the amount of troops that are required to occupy that territory. They're also uninterested in peacekeepers, they've stated publicly. So in order for them to be able to successfully deploy this type of a strategy, they are reliant on an external source of troops. Now let me ask you guys this. Did the American people vote on this? Are we at all interested other than the government in trying to ensure that this happens? No. Nope. Not at all. Do you think somebody from Arkansas should try to, jump in the middle of a conflict in an area where they might not be able to point it out on the map? And that's not against people from Arkansas, by the way. I can say that in Texas or Florida or Oregon or California or wherever. You understand the point that I'm trying to prove. And also, by the way, while we're discussing troop numbers, it is absolutely vital for me to tell you that we, Americans, don't have the amount of troops necessary to occupy Iran. Oopsie poopsie, I bet you didn't know that. No slight on you. It's because it's not talked about in the media. We always discuss whether we're going to do X or Y or Z. we have never discussed whether or not we actually have the capacity to actually do that. We do not have the capacity for that. So what I'm trying to say is we are absolutely overextending ourselves to the fullest capacity, and I don't think any Americans should die for a policy, for a government who is enacting legislature, the Israeli government, who is enacting military policies that involve us without our say. I care about you guys, and I care about my family, right? Who voted for this? So just watch this play out, understand what is happening, and just know the consequences of what we're about to see. That is the literal point. Video number 2. Netanyahu's hidden intentions for what is going to happen with the Gazans. Now, there's an interesting story for you guys here. So there's a guy, I'm going to botch his name, I apologize. His name is Mir Ben Shabbat. Now, he was the national security advisor for Netanyahu. Pretty prominent guy. Somebody that you might like him or hate him. Somebody that you might be interested in knowing what he has to say. Now, he's currently the head of Mezgov Institute, which is a think tank. I apologize if I butchered that. Mezgov Institute, think tank, he's the head of it. Why is this relevant in any way, shape, or form? Why is this relevant to us as Americans? Well, because he actually said the quiet part out loud. I would consider him maybe to be a passive, low-key whistleblower, particularly to us in the States, almost kind of to warn us about what we're actually about to see Israel do and how that's going to affect our probability of getting into a war. So what did he say? Well, this is according to The Intercept, and then I'm going to switch to some Israeli sources. So the think tank released a report honestly exposing Netanyahu's strategy. Quote, "There is currently a unique and rare opportunity to evacuate the entire Gaza Strip." Another quote, "There is no doubt that in order for this plan to be enacted, many conditions need to exist in parallel. At the moment, these conditions exist, and it is unclear when such an opportunity will arise again, if at all." So what is the question is, what are they going to do with these Palestinians? And what is crazy is that I'm sure nobody's even heard of this story before, which is why I wanted to talk about it. So the idea is to send them to Egypt, pay Egypt to house its former inhabitants, the Palestinians, in order to currently empty apartments near Cairo. So they're trying to buy off the Egyptian government to move Palestinians. It's kind of funny because whenever we learn about these things, there's always a debate about ethnic cleansing. And I was listening to the group that you guys might have heard of called Breaking Points, and there's a kind of a debate. Is it ethnic cleansing or is it not? My perception, based off of kind of my own studies into ethnic cleansing, is ethnic cleansing does happen whether it is intentional or not, whether the primary objective is to clear out Palestinians or to remove Palestinians, well, to kill them, point blankly. And ethnic cleansing is the clearing out of a space of an individual group. So if Egypt doesn't accept these individuals and they die as a result, it's ethnic cleansing. Right now, if Egypt is saying that they're not willing to take them, which is the current Egyptian stance, which might change, if they're saying that they're not willing to take these individuals, they're probably going to die. And the Egyptian government at this moment said that they are willing to let hundreds of thousands of folks die. They're talking about the Palestinians. They're willing to let them die before letting them in. And Israel is trying to forgive all of their international debt, essentially is the idea, which, by the way, is probably going to be the U.S. taxpayers that are going to be paying that off as well. So these are hidden intentions. Now, what's really interesting about this is that Netanyahu actually responded to this type of critique. So what did he say? Netanyahu admitted this plan and said that it was essentially a hypothetical. Netanyahu said, oh yeah, this was a plan, this is legit, but it's just a hypothetical. Well, then what's the first plan? Because so far, you guys have floated an idea of creating some sort of an island to put these individuals, throwing them into refugee camps in the Sinai Peninsula. Wait, who controls Sinai Peninsula? That is who controls that right now? That is the Egyptian government. Put them in Cairo, that is the Egyptian government. Why do I think that the Egyptian government might take some of these individuals? They have a military government that is bought off by the United States, who dropped billions of dollars for them. So if we have Netanyahu who's trying to clear all of them out, and at the same time, in the first video, this might be the second video, in the first video I was just stating how Netanyahu essentially wants to permanently occupy the Gaza Strip, which they don't have the forces, so they need the U.S. to jump in. and now we have the mass exodus. Now all we need to know is what specifically happened the last time there was an exodus to understand what might happen this time as well. And that's what the next video is going to go over. But I think as Americans, we have to accept the fact whether we are going to be okay with another ethnic cleansing on our hands or not. I don't see a lot of people fighting back. The last video for you guys today is secret IDF documents reveal the brutal reality of the 1948 ethnic cleansing. So this was called the Nakba, which is Arabic for catastrophe. 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly exiled or murdered, which I already know I'm going to get probably most of my views cut by YouTube, and nobody's actually going to see a lot of these videos because I'm stating a lot of these things. By the way, most of the time if you mention Israel, Palestinians, or any sort of the word killing or ethnic cleansing, things like that, you're pretty much screwed. But I wanted to bring this up because I went to a couple different interesting museums, one in Israel. It was the Holocaust Museum and the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And a lot of what was being said was, oh, a lot of these folks had left willingly. What? Like, sorry, excuse me. Hold on. What? So I wanted to set the record straight by reading you guys IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, their military. I wanted to read you their documents about what happens, which contrasts the public narrative that is being spread right now. And I can tell you right now, this is probably going to be one of the more interesting videos you've learned, because this is from, what is that saying? The horse's mouth, right? This is from the IDF themselves about what specifically happened and what kind of strategies they had to get rid of these individuals. Okay, so by the way, right now I wanted to show you, if you're listening to this, I'm showing on the screen right now kind of the ways in which the refugees had moved out of the currently occupied Israeli territories into the Palestinian territories and moved to Jordan and et cetera, et cetera. You get the point. I just wanted you guys to get a geographic idea about what happened here. Now, I read these documents a long time ago. I was writing this thesis on the psychology of Palestinian suicide bombers, and I recently came across it in the Washington Post. These are translated, obviously. It was written in Hebrew originally. So this is the Washington Post. I want to read you one of the quotes. This is the document itself that was translated and published by the Washington Post. Here's what it says, quote, "In reviewing the factors that affected migration, we list factors that had a definitive effect on population migration. The factors, in order of importance, this is the most important part, are direct Jewish hostile actions against Arab communities, Jewish whispering operations, psychological warfare, intended to drive Arabs to flee, the element of surprise, long stints of shelling with extremely loud blasts and loudspeakers in Arabic proved very effective when properly used." Now, they mentioned also that this was effective at scaring neighbor villages who were not even victims, thus causing evacuations. Other things that they had used were evacuation ultimatums, fear of Jewish retaliation upon a major Arab attack on Jews, the appearance of gangs and foreign fighters near the village, Arab villages isolated within purely Jewish areas, And so these are all different types of physical and psychological tactics in order to clear these individuals out. Now, what I have a problem with is the fact that a lot of times when we hear about these types of things, there's always kind of what is the word I'm looking for? They're kind of playing down the significance of the military force and forcibly driving these individuals away. Now, I don't know how much you guys are hearing this currently, but I can tell you going internationally to a lot of the European guilt-esque type of countries, such as Germany, by example, this is the type of things that we hear. Or, for example, obviously with Israel. And these are the types of things that they tie to the conservatives in those areas to try to justify what they had done. This obviously has significant impacts of what might happen in the future. And so they had a saying, actually, which I thought was kind of interesting. It says, quote, "If the mighty have fallen." And what they were talking about is if they were able to isolate and destroy specific big towns, destroy being forcibly removing the populace and moving settlers into this area, then some of the local outskirt areas might be afraid and try to move themselves as well. Now, here's another interesting quote. Quote, "Without a doubt, hostilities were the main factor in population movement." Much more to the documents that I'm not going over because I don't want this to be super long, so please read it in the description box below. But I want to repeat that again. Without a doubt, hostilities were the main factor in the population movement. This is according to the IDF themselves. I love the fact that we can't even admit what this really was, which was effectively an ethnic cleansing. Again, it goes back to what we're seeing today, where people could say, well, it wasn't the intention. The intention was to clear out the space, and by default, there might have been an ethnic cleansing, more or less. Whether it was direct or indirect, it is what it is. So here's the last interesting aspect. Around 13,000 Palestinians were killed in total, depending on where you get your information from. I'll go into that later in a different video if you would like. 70% of Gazans are refugees. This was before the war that's currently embarking right now. These are individuals who spent their entire lives and over generations into refugee camps themselves. So listen, that was an ethnic cleansing. A lot of times in these areas too, they would identify, this was earlier in different Israeli IDF archives, they would identify the leaders in a lot of these towns and they would have a public execution. What do you think is going to happen today? Currently, there is an information blackout in the Palestinian territories and we really can't see what's going on. Last time they did these types of operations, we see precisely what is happening. Well, last time we see what's going on now that they did in the past. That's what I'm trying to say. So I think this goes down to a fundamental question of if we are defending a place like Ukraine from a Russian invasion, a permanent annexation, and we don't do the same to Israel, do you think that is going to gain us international legitimacy or make us look like an absolute joke? Because right now there's a power competition between us and, say, China. China's filling a void of, hey, maybe you guys shouldn't do this in Israel. Granted, they also think that what Russia is doing is, not that bad. I think right now, if we decide that we're going to stick with Israel, they're going to do similar tactics. A lot of psychological operations that they've been doing. We're likely going to see a surge in suicide bombers if they haven't already been enacted already, based off of what I'd seen in the past and all the different research that's indicating such things. I think that the Arab communities are going to go ahead and full stop turn on us. There's already hundreds of operations that are against U.S. forces in the Middle East and elsewhere. What do you think is going to happen? And it's already too late for a two-state solution. It's going to be a South African situation. We're going to have to blend the two populations together. If you want to go into the real technical aspects, the Palestinian territory is already sectioned off in the West Bank in section A, B, and C. It's not even a clear and concise full section. Majority of Palestinian jobs were in Israel for construction and things like that. Before the war, there's already an unemployment rate of 46%. Majority are kids. And you're going to go ahead and try to kill them? I don't want to hear the fact that there's some sort of a negotiated ceasefire right now. There's still strikes going on through that ceasefire. I don't know if you knew that or not. That's a thing. So if we actually think that we are the supporters of freedom and so on, I want to see which politicians are actually standing up right now. And I get it, right? A lot of people like myself are saying this, but we are no-name individuals who are just talking to a camera. I know a lot of folks right now are listening to this, and they probably agree with what I'm saying. What I would like to know is for you guys to keep track of who exactly are your representatives. I want somebody to keep a running tally of what they have supported and what they have not. And I would like this to haunt people in the future, because there's going to be folks in the future who are going to say, oh, I support freedom, I support all this other shit. But at the same time, we can point to this very moment and be like, oh yeah, hey, you remember that time you were trying to support that ethnic cleansing and now you want to do another military operation to support freedom here and there? Y'all are a bunch of absolute psychopaths, and this is precisely why the American people trust absolutely none of you. None of you. And we are losing trust internationally because of stuff just like this. We are living through history at this very moment. And I bet folks probably think they're on the right side, despite the fact that there are a lot of babies that are being killed at this very moment.